Shalom, and welcome to Keeping the Shul Lights On, a podcast about the challenges of operating a synagogue, creating a Jewish community, and the hard work and efforts of a congregation's executive director and Jewish organizational leadership. Brought to you by Shul Marketing. Concerned your congregation and community are not responding to your Shul Marketing? Discover the strategies to connect with them, reach them where they are, and develop the results your leadership is seeking. Here is your host, Howard Walpoff.
Welcome back to Keeping the Shul Lights On. I'm Howard Walpoff, your host. And again, this is brought to you by Shul Marketing. And we're going to have yet another conversation about synagogues and an executive director running a synagogue and the experience that they have with creating this community and making sure this community has the ability to have events and services and connectivity and all the different pieces that go about what people don't usually see when walking into the doors of a shul and how things operate. So we're going to jump right into it. I have Jeff Jacob from Temple Beth of Hollywood in South Florida with us today. And Jeff, welcome to our conversation.
Thanks, Howard. It's nice to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Well, I appreciate you being here because it's just I love learning about the different types of synagogues that exist around the country and the leadership that they have within to make sure that Jews across the country are getting these experiences and these opportunities for being a community and having a place to have services and events. So let me start with what drew you into working for the Jewish community?
So when I first started working in nonprofit management, it wasn't my goal to work in the Jewish community. Though I had been brought up in it, of course, and I was bar mitzvahed at an Orthodox synagogue in the Washington D.C. suburbs, and I was a JCC summer camp kid, like a lot of us, and I had a lot of love and affection and certainly knowledge of the Jewish community. It was never a professional goal of mine to work within it, but when I was leaving Nashville, Tennessee, about a decade ago, the main reason I was leaving Nashville for South Florida, other than that my family lives down here and I love the beach, was that I had been volunteering as an animal rescuer in various shapes and forms for a couple of years up in Nashville, just as sort of a hobby. I had also been running my own team building business, working with a lot of Fortune 500s and other kinds of organizations for a few years. And I got a crazy idea in my head that wouldn't it be nifty if I could figure out a way to combine what I considered to be my growing experience in team building and leadership with my fabulous volunteer experience in animal welfare. I'm gonna look for a job in nonprofit management. That's not what I studied in school, but hey, so I just started putting together in Google searches and on Indeed the words team building and leadership and animal welfare. And within a 2 or 3 day period, an operations director position popped up for the largest no-kill private dog rescue east of the Mississippi in South Florida, in a town in South Florida. So I applied. And without going into all the particulars, I got the job.
Nice.
And so uprooted from Nashville, which was difficult because I love Nashville. I was there almost 2 decades in the music industry, and I loved it. But it was time for a change, and I moved down and ran a 12-acre, 60-employee, 300-animal capacity facility for about 2 years as my first job in nonprofit down here, with a lot of interesting aspects to it, a lot of challenges. And a few years later, when I was moving on to another stage in my life and career, I found myself looking for a different sector of nonprofit, and an opportunity came up to be the assistant executive director at a very large conservative synagogue in Boca Raton. So I applied for that job, and that's what led me to the path of where I'm at now, which is several years later at Temple Beth.
Well, it definitely is great when you have these goals and try to find the right opportunities to fit those goals and actually get them finding those opportunities, because not everyone is as successful in doing that. So congratulations to you for that path, but also defining this as the opportunity that you're currently enjoying, because I'm sure while there's definitely a not-for-profit theme between what you're doing and what you're doing now, they're very different types of operations that you're running.
They are very different, but it's interesting. When I interviewed for the assistant executive director in 2016 at this other um, um, synagogue, the senior rabbi was meeting with me after I had met with the executive director at the time, who became not just my boss, but definitely my friend and mentor in a lot of ways. And I was nervous about meeting with him. Nice guy, very charismatic. But I didn't have previous professional experience at a synagogue. I had done I had taken on a fair amount of what we would call, I guess, lay leadership roles in the Jewish community in Nashville at the Reform Synagogue that I was mostly involved with, and even at the JCC. Um, uh, but um, but those were volunteer roles, and they were finite and niche. Um, and when the rabbi asked me, what kind of other synagogue experience do you have professionally, I gave him a very short answer. I said very little, almost none. And we talked about what the previous experience was, and I remember him saying, "That's good. I'm really glad you don't have other synagogue experience. We need new ideas. We need other sectors. We need experiences that are in nonprofit management from totally different kinds of organizations to take us where we want to go. We need a different way of thinking." And so I think that's great. That's a plus. Embrace it. And I was so relieved to hear that kind of an answer, because that's the way that I was thinking and approaching it. And of course, there have been the various jokes as I get to know people in the community down here, that if you can break up a dog fight with 10 or 15 dogs in a field, you can probably handle a Jewish board of directors, probably. And so that's always been a nice conversation point.
Well, at the very least, you have that background just in case something erupts during the middle of a board meeting. But it's key information you're sharing, because being an executive director or an assistant executive director, there's a lot of vision that's needed in the process, because you're not just focusing on the day-to-day and so many different directions that the synagogue works in, but you're also looking towards the future, and really having some different types of experiences can really bring great opportunity for the synagogue that hires someone with your type of background.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, which is that certainly the first couple of months I was here, which were only, by the way, a few months before the rabbi we'd had for 26 years, who was very beloved and very ingrained in our community, I knew that we were also bringing a new rabbi on board soon, shortly into my tenure, and that would be a search process, and obviously not one that guarantees a great result. You just never know. So I had about 6 or 7 months with our outgoing rabbi to kind of get the lay of the land and start observing what was going on as we were coming out of COVID, and how we operated on a regular daily and weekly basis. Where were the areas that we're doing great in, and where are areas that we need to tweak or change or just drop, before we would have yet another senior leadership person here in a relatively small congregation, the rabbi, who was going to have a lot to say once he or she was on the ground for a bit and observed and started deciding that it was time to make some suggested changes as well. And so that felt like a really neat opportunity to get the lay of the land before someone else came in, who also was going to be getting the lay of the land, and then also probably suggesting some changes. So it's really an intriguing period of time to have been here, to have been starting out here. Yeah.
And it's an intriguing concept that you segue that to, where you are, as an executive director, the operational leader of this organization. However, there's also the rabbi, who is the spiritual leader of the organization, and then the board president, who is called the executive leader of the congregation. 3 people with different backgrounds, perhaps different visions, hopefully somewhere all visions connecting to make things run fluidly. But it's a lot of different people who are looked at as leaders in different ways and trying to figure out how that all works smoothly so that there aren't any challenges and aren't any questions of who's in charge when certain decisions and issues come up.
Yeah, so true. And when I came on board, also there was a different president who was coming to the end of his term. Um, and while I was really, trying hard to work well with him, I also knew that there was someone else, and I didn't really know who that was. It was, I mean, I had some ideas about it, but it wasn't confirmed who that was going to be right away. But the great news for me and for us was that once the new rabbi came in, and she's fabulous, um, uh, we've been able to build with a new president, a new rabbi, and a relatively new executive director. I was in place slightly before either of those two, just a matter of months. Um, what I told both of them when we first began meeting as a unit, which is, like I said, not to be sacrilegious here in a synagogue, but this is kind of the holy trilogy, right? I mean, this is we have to have a sacred trust with one another, the three of us, because at the end of the day, board, staff, volunteers, we are the primary leaders, movers, and shakers. And unlike a bigger organization where you may have a lot more layers to that, we don't. So it's been really great. It's been a learning process with new people, of course, but I feel really blessed that I have good partners, and it's been an exciting time. We've been turning over some seats on the board, which is a good thing. Um, and for just like for a lot of congregations, especially in an area such as South Florida, we've had a fairly a board that's been fairly advanced in its average age, and for a synagogue, especially a Reform synagogue, which battles to stay sustainable and relevant so much with a younger population that is very much immersed in the secular world. And that's not a judgment, it's just an observation, and it's a fact.
Sure.
um, you know um, we now have probably half the board is under 50, and that wasn't the case even a year ago. A year ago, I might have said there's 2 or 3 people like that. So to go from 2 or 3 people who are of the younger demographic to 6 or 7 or 8 is a big change and an adjustment, but it speaks really well towards the possibility of a sustainable future.
It's very interesting that as an executive director, you're working with a rabbi who, for the most part, has some length in their contract in the time they are at a synagogue, aside from when they're just starting. But you actually have a president who will come off every 4 years, based on what kind of terms that there are. I sense that the president who just left office recently definitely may not have known what was in store for them, having to replace the rabbi and the executive director at the same time during their tenure, and what that might bring to their timeline and time spent with regard to their time investment into the synagogue. But it also it's always unique of the different personalities that you have serving as president. In general politics, at least there's some level of political office that most have held in different statures when they become president of the United States, as an example. Being a synagogue president, you could have been a dentist who's been on the board for a long time. You could you could be in real estate. You come with different skill sets to be a board member, but not always the skill set other than just timing and placement to be the president of a congregation.
Yeah, and the current president, like our new rabbi, is 35,
Okay.
and has had a couple has been an associate rabbi at a large congregation previously, and has led a congregation that was very, very small in a southern rural town. So in a lot of ways, it's not that this is his first pulpit per se, but it kind of really is his first pulpit as truly the guy in a metropolitan market somewhere. And I got you. So,
Yep.
so it's interesting. So, yes, our new rabbi is 35, and our new president is approaching 70, and she checks a lot of boxes that you would want in a president, and then some. So, what I mean by that is, she, long before becoming president, was a long-term member of the congregation, so she knew it really well. She knew the demographics, she knew the tendencies, the quirks of a lot of people. And let's face it, a congregation is an ecosystem, and the nuances of an ecosystem like this can be many. And so she knew a lot of the things going on in the nooks and crannies, a lot of the contextual stuff. And having that context and knowledge, as well as the fact that she's so smart, you put all that together, and her level of engagement, and you would hope for a lot of that in a president. She also had an experience many years ago in New York City as a really well-respected writer and an editor for various publications. And even though we have, myself included, folks who consider themselves to be good content writers and creative thinkers here, very few people, relatively speaking, to how many consider themselves good writers, would also consider themselves to be good editors. So, like, whether it's our weekly newsletter, our quarterly glossy magazine, our website changes, there are a lot of things that our president Sharon edits for us it's not part of her job as president, but there's no one else that's going to do it. And if she likes, so she's passionate about it, she's good with it. And as she likes to say, I just want to make us look smarter, and I'll be the one to do it. And I'm like, that's great, because no one else is going to take the time, and none of us have your passion or skills for it. So this is something that takes up a great deal of her time, actually. And what an amazing thing to have that. Sometimes it's like, oh, she told us we missed that comma, but most of the time it's wow, like, you're right, that reads a lot better that way. Thanks for catching that. It's pretty amazing.
There's great value into having volunteers, and that's one of the greatest things about a congregation. You have a vast array of people from all walks of life and all walks of industry that you hope will want to share that in some way with the congregation. And whether it's having these amazing doctors who you couldn't pay for as a group, but to be on a committee to handle all the issues of COVID, was very helpful for a lot of synagogues. Like,
Sure.
how did you? Now, obviously, your congregation now, after the lockdowns and biggest issues that congregations had during the period of COVID, but at your previous synagogue, what kind of challenges were you dealing with on a day-to-day basis once the mandates were to close synagogues and not be able to be a physically connected community?
So I wasn't at my previous synagogue work was before COVID.
Okay.
And at this at Temple Beth Hollywood, I came in at the tail end of COVID, or at least at the period that a lot of us in a professional position considered to be coming out of COVID. I was here when we had when we had gone to making masks optional, when there were still discussions being had about whether we should require proof of vaccination to enter, and what to do with the kids in the preschool, and now we're coming back into live programs and services. What's the balance of live versus virtual versus hybrid? All of those conversations were still were happening very much during my first 6 to 8 months on the job. I was here when we had a real dip in the numbers, and then we hit the Omicron variant, which of course for a lot of people became very scary again for a couple months, and it was even more infectious, even though it was
Yes.
generally regarded as less not as strong a variant as far as its impact on people, but more contagious. And so, at that point, like, we had really gone back to most of our programs being live or at least hybrid. But as I was trying to help us plan our first live in-person Hanukkah dinner in 3 years or 2 years, depending on how you look at it. We were very much having the conversations about what to do with that dinner, and Omicron had literally just exploded in the 2 weeks or so before that. So we canceled the Hanukkah dinner and pulled things back for 3 or 4 weeks until we got a handle on what Omicron really looked like. And that was disappointing to a lot of us. But by that point, we were 2 years into this thing, and we had, most of us, gotten a clue on how to be just adaptable and flexible, and realizing that this is not a forever thing. So it was a really interesting, challenging time. But also for us, long before I got here, this congregation has been live streaming its services for 15 or 16 years.
No.
And so, and even though I know plenty of Reform and some conservative synagogues have been doing it for some time as well, I would venture to say that the vast majority hadn't gone nearly over to the degree that COVID forced us all to, as far as the programming went. So we were already very familiar with the live streaming aspects of things. We'd already started going on to Facebook and YouTube from whatever our main platform was for years. And so we already had some of that figured out prior to COVID, which was nice. Now, of course, that we truly feel like we're mostly past this once in a lifetime pandemic, hopefully, we continue to have conversations for the smaller auxiliaries, such as women's spirituality group or a book club or sisterhood, about Zoom versus in-person versus hybrid. And I've been trying to pull back on the whole Zoom as a verb thing. I who would have thought that Zoom would become a verb rather than just a noun or a descriptive. So much so, right? I mean, isn't that interesting from a business perspective? I mean, Skype had such a head start. There's FaceTime, but Zoom has become so ubiquitous with any kind of virtual meeting that any of those other platforms suffer an identity crisis to some degree, because I don't know about you, but most of us simply say, well, why don't we set up a Zoom? Even if what we really mean is, can we meet on Microsoft Teams?
Exactly. It's like getting food from the Frigidaire, or getting a Kleenex, because they're so branded in what has now become a mainstay of Jewish life and activity, and in ways that people are still connecting and communicating.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So let's take a different focus on the things that you do. So share with us a little bit of how would you describe your role within the day-to-day of operating the synagogue?
Yeah, it's such an interesting open question, because congregations all share a lot of similarities, and yet you can almost always find tremendous differences in the way they're run as well, based on so many factors: size of congregation, volunteer pool, the talents of your various leadership personnel, the size of your leadership and support staffs, the donor base, the needs of the community, and how fast are the demographics in that community changing. So many factors go into answering that question. When I was in the interview process, the search committee asked all the questions you would expect about my experience with budgeting and my experience with fundraising and donor development. And one of the ones that came up frequently was there has not ever been a full-time program manager or program director at this synagogue, at least not any time in recent memory. It hasn't, the size of the congregation and support staff just doesn't support that position. And yet, as I shared at our most recent board meeting just a few nights ago, if you compare our events and programs schedule with that of congregations twice our size, we compare very favorably as far as the volume and variety of programming and services we offer. So much so that I told the board that it's a goal of mine over the next year I would like to reduce the quantity of programs we offer. And the philosophy I have, because we have a very small support staff here and a volunteer base that still needs to improve, let's just put it that way.
Sure.
I would rather do 10% less programming and do the other 90%, 50% better, and so sometimes less is more. I was very much brought in as an executive director and program director in one. They very much wanted someone who had a lot of programming experience, in addition to leadership chops. And I said, well, I can be that guy. I have a lot of event planning and marketing and programming experience, dating way back to my days in radio promotion and as a regional marketing director for Borders Books and Music before they went Chapter 11. And I would love to bring some of that to this role. Yes, I can manage our staff, and yes, I can hire and develop, and I'm passionate about that. But I'm pretty good at programming. And when the opportunity arises, I will put in my 2 cents on that front and help us improve what we do or grow the variety of what we do. So that was really pretty instrumental in the hiring process, and the presumption that I would wear the hat of lead administrator, at least co-lead programmer, along with committee chairs and rabbi, et cetera, et cetera. And then, one of my observations of us as a Reform synagogue when I came on board was Jeff's idea of modern Reform Judaism coming into this role was that two of the main pillars of successful Reform synagogues that I grew up with, or at least in Nashville when I was in my late 20s and early 30s there, and I came back to the fold of Judaism and started going to this really cool Reform synagogue. To me, like, the things that attracted me most about it were its variety of musical worship offerings and its social action programs, initiatives, and of course just the people and the clergy. But social action and a musical component, those are huge pillars to modern Reform Judaism.
Sure.
And I felt as though we had done some really cool social action consistently in the past prior to COVID, and but there was really room to recalibrate and relaunch that. And even though we have a wonderful cantor in place for Friday nights and some of the other stuff that he does, we had a rabbi that, as he had aged, he used to play guitar as part of what we did, mostly stopped doing that. A great religious school director who's part-time, but who has experience as a song leader. But it really felt to me when I came on board like we were lacking a variety and quantity of musical worship offerings that, to me, in my opinion and in my heart, were integral parts of Reform Judaism, and we really had room to improve that aspect of what we do. So I offered as part of the process. I was like, look, this is not why you're hiring me, but I am a former Nashville songwriter. I've done worship leading. I have event production and service production and concert production experience. If there's ever a time when you want me to pinch hit with the cantor, for the cantor, or on other programs that seem to make sense at the time, as an ancillary part of what I do, if it benefits the congregation, it's something I can have fun with, I'm good at, and it might expand the offerings that we're able to put out there to our community and the greater community. And they were excited about that. And that would actually come home to roost within the first 3 or 4 months of I got here, because along with our religious school director, Barbara, we launched a new religious service, a very alternative religious service on second Saturdays called Shabbat Stock, which has become a key to what I think are our religious service offerings. And it's a very non-traditional service. And maybe you can ask me a fun leading question about more details there, but I don't want to get too off track from your original question.
It's, again, it goes back to the vision that when in the conversation that you were having with the rabbi during that interview, is you have a vision, having experience at different other congregations, whether as a member or in a hired capacity, and where you want to marry younger people into the congregation with the reason why they'd want to be in the building. It seems that you've had a good start in creating that type of programming and focusing in the programming to really help the development of membership as time goes on.
So if this is an appropriate point to talk about a few of the things that we've done in that direction or down that vein, I'd be
Sure.
happy to mention them briefly.
Absolutely.
Sure. So aside from all of the basics that should be in place at a congregation of any kind, certainly a Reform congregation, after those first 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I was really trying to, and as someone who considers himself a bit of a creative, it's impossible to stop the hamster wheel, of course, but I was really trying to think, what are some of the things that we can either add or adjust, recalibrate, that feel like they would fill a gap, even if it's a gap we did not know we had previously. So 3 or 4 months in, I think it was, I was discussing with a gal named Jackie, who when I came on board, her title was administrative assistant / rabbi's assistant, but she had primarily been here during COVID when our activities were very minimal. But previous to that, she had been our preschool PTO president for 2 years. I found out, and as I got to know her, I was like, wow, we are tapping into like 15% of this young lady's brain and creativity, and we're a small staff. We can't afford to only be using 15% of someone's capacity. And very quickly, she became the right-hand person that every leader needs in an organization. I was talking with her and our religious school director, Barbara, a couple other people, about how can we get younger families, the preschool families, the religious school families, and of course, those are two very intersecting communities, to come to Friday night services, which of course in Reform land, Friday night service is kind of the highlight of the week in most situations, not Saturdays, bar and bat mitzvahs aside. And the feedback that I got over a period of a few weeks was, even though we've tried various times on Friday nights and various themes, a lot of the younger families just do not want to come out on Friday night. With the younger kids, especially once it's a second kid or a third kid, they are done by the time Friday night hits at 6 or 7 o'clock. They're done. They want to have the kids in PJs, dinner done, and they want to, at the very least, they want to have Netflix on and the kids getting ready to go to bed. So I was like, okay, well, what other way can we approach a religious service that's not Friday night? Saturday is part of Shabbat after all. Let's remember that. And so we started coming up with a concept, and we decided to try it. And we wanted to do an alternative Saturday service. And I wanted the premise behind this service to be, what are all of the excuses Jeff uses, or any of the other people in my age group? I'm 53. As a musician, that means I really think I'm 35, but I'm not. I said, what are the excuses we use to not go to religious services in a community that's very secular? I was like, okay, the coffee shop, the dog park, the yoga studio, going to listen to good music. How can I wrap all that into a mini Shabbat festival feel, and make it a hang that people want to go to? Oh, and by the way, they can check the box that they went to a Shabbat service as a nice sidebar. So I hired a coffee truck, because synagogue coffee by reputation generally sucks. It's generally Maxwell House or whatever's cheapest for us to purchase. And I want to take away the excuse of going to the local coffee shop once a month and give them that experience. So I figured, let's bring in a coffee truck so people can get their latte or espresso fix. Let's offer yoga. Let's make it dog friendly, because 3 out of 4 American households has a pet, Jewish or not. And let's offer a very different kind of music as part of this service than our typical Friday night service offers. So we started Shabbat Stock. We battled over the name back and forth a little bit, and we came up with a little bit of an offshoot of the Woodstock theme. And so second Saturdays became Shabbat Stock. I hired professional musicians for the percussion and for fiddle, and the two of us, religious school director Barb and I, were the singers and sort of guitar players. And it's out, weather permitting, it was going to be outside. And and our second Saturday service, at least not during the hot season, was created. It was very well received the first couple of months, especially, and it's now become embedded over the last 13, 14 months as a part of our religious worship service offerings. We're now rebranding it because Shabbat Stock, we've decided, or frankly, mostly I decided, but our new young rabbi agrees, sort of connects us very pointedly to a certain generation that some families, probably anyone in their 40s and younger, unless they're truly music fan, like, religious music fans, religious about their music fandom, the Woodstock name is pretty dated. And also all these conversations around it were, oh, you do this Shabbat Stock thing, what is that? And the answer was usually, well, on second Saturdays, every second Saturday, we have this alternative worship service on the front lawn. So we're starting in the fall. It'll be simply called second Saturdays led by our house band, which is called Jewgrass Revival. And it's become a huge thing for us. And as a marketing tool, it's not just an event and it's not just a service, but it's something I can put out there to young, unaffiliated Jews who are music fans, who love their coffee, who love their dogs, who love yoga as just a different way to worship. And maybe it's just a cool hang we go to on the front lawn under the trees. That's the way we're trying to think here. We've also declared ourselves, without any scientific data or polling, the most dog-friendly synagogue in Florida. I doubt I can ever prove it scientifically, but my dog is here 3 or 4 days a week. The rabbis is, our new finance managers is. We've told folks if they feel better bringing their dogs to various events or programs that are appropriate, including worship on Friday nights, as long as they're sociable and house trained, we're fine with that. Up until recently, it was part of our mission statement on the homepage of the website. We're now recalibrating the website. So what are some things we're doing to differentiate ourselves? We're truly dog friendly. We offer what I call a Jewgrass folk rock service on second Saturdays that is not like anything anyone else around here offers. We have a young, dynamic rabbi that looks at things very differently. I mean, we've even partnered with the Broward Folk Music Club as of a few months ago, and we now offer a quarterly series with the Folk Club that's kind of like a house concert in our smaller chapel that brings in traveling folk and Americana artists that have nothing to do with Judaism as something to offer to both our community and the community at large. And as I told our board this last Monday night, while these look like events, to me, they're marketing and advertising vehicles disguised as events, because 90% of the people that come to the few of these we've done thus far are not our congregants. And to me, that's great. That's what advertising and marketing is for, is to try to get new footsteps in the door. So we're trying a lot of different things.
It really is fantastic with what you're doing, because there really is a need in general for outreach to those that aren't as comfortable coming to synagogue and services anymore, and events into the building. And you're finding multiple ways to bring people in really is fantastic. And it's great to see the kind of results that you're receiving from it to generate what I guess a synagogue that is aging really needs: new blood and new opportunity with a growing younger membership.
Well, it's so necessary for us. I mean, when I took the job, I asked to receive a 10-year. I wanted a very basic spreadsheet, because to me, basic and simple is good when I'm looking at data. I wanted a very basic spreadsheet or curved chart on the membership for the last decade. They were gracious enough to give me a 20-year curve. I'm not really interested in 30 or 40 years ago. You might as well be talking about 500 years ago about the way that communities have changed.
Sure.
But they gave me a 20-year membership chart, and there was really a very symmetrical curve. In the early 2000s, we were about where we are now. For about 5 years in the 2008 to 2013 range, we were twice where we're at now. And then it went back down over the last decade to where we're at now again. We're back where we were from like 2000 to say 2005 or 6. And no one was ever able to give me much of a reason as to that huge jump and that decline again, other than a changing community. So it didn't give me a lot to go on, and all I could do after a period of time was start to really ask for feedback from the young parents in our preschool and religious schools as to what they were seeking in a congregation, what they were missing. And again, it's a lot of anecdotal conversation. They're they're all so pulled in many directions, and it was the premise behind Shabbat Stock again, which is I want to be able to meet these people where they're at, and where they're at is just like 20 years ago. They have piano lessons, they have basketball practice, they have karate. Now they also all have social media and iPads and 20 devices in a home to compete with as well. How do we become more relevant to them and stay relevant? And you can say until you're blue in the face, well, we need to engage them better. That's like me saying I need to put gasoline in my tank. Of course, I need to put gasoline in my tank. How do we engage them better? And that's you got to try things. I sit on a call once a month or so with a group of executive directors from 15 or 20, mostly reform, but a few conservative congregations in Florida. And it's a networking call and an idea to share, to commiserate and share resources. And there were some reform synagogues on these calls the last several months talking about their virtual capacity. And some of these congregations that are reformed don't have the benefit that we do of a growing preschool and a religious school that also seems to be growing, although not nearly as fast. And they're wondering, if so much has gone virtual and a lot of their aging congregations are demanding that they stay virtual or at least hybrid, how do they even know that they're needed in 5 or 10 years to have a building? And meaning if a lot of these folks are demanding, we love the fact that Friday nights are virtual, we're going to stay on our couch because that's what we like to do.
Yep.
If they're asking you to do that in some shape or form, you have to at least offer that as an option. But if they don't have new blood coming in from the religious school, and frankly, we at Bethel, we're fortunate that we truly own one of the only synagogue-owned cemeteries in all of South Florida. A lot of them are owned by these corporations.
Yep.
But that cemetery, it's going to run out of inventory in 7 or 8 years, and our preschool is going to cap out at some point unless we build on. So I've told my peers, I'm like, if there's ever a time you all can reinvent yourselves, we all think in reform synagogues that we're all so creative and we're so open to being able to try anything because we're reform, and therefore we're not as tied to ritual or religious constrictions of more traditional synagogues. But the reality is, I can go to Reform synagogue anywhere in the country, and in 9 out of 10 of them, I'm going to get a very familiar experience. So how innovative are we truly? We've been telling ourselves that, but if there's ever a time to radically reinvent yourselves in some shape or form, it would be after a once in a lifetime pandemic, when you're facing an opportunity to say, we've got to change. We don't know what that looks like yet, but as a congregation, bear with us, because for the next year or 2 or 3, we're going to try some things that look really different. And some of them will work and some of them will not. And we would love your input, but sometimes we're just going to try things that you wouldn't expect. Now's the time.
Well, it's phenomenal, your vision and the way you are seeing the future for your congregation. And you make a very key point that other congregations really need to be doing similar things to make sure there is a future, not just looking at the immediacy of 23 and 24, what happens in 34, 35, and so on, where there's a lot of change going on within Jewish communities and a lot of movement going on in the country in general, especially people in and out of Florida. As we're now seeing at a faster rate than probably the people tracking things in Tallahassee can keep up with. But it's necessary to really have vision moving forward to make sure that there is a building to keep the shul lights on. and if there's a need, and what are you doing to fill that building on a regular basis so that things are really growing, and you're able to accomplish what you need to. And you really bring up, not just with these points, some great things, Jeff. The whole conversation, it's fantastic what your journey has brought you, so that you're able to translate it all into what you're doing right now for your congregation. And I would love to go any further, but time is of the essence, and just really appreciate you being on and having this conversation with us.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation. And if anything I have had to offer sparks an idea or two amongst anyone who watches your podcasts, then the time is well spent. Look, all boats rise has always been my philosophy when it comes to business or organizations that seemingly occupy the same space and are competing for business or congregants. But all boats, that you got to be in it for the collective. And yeah, there are a lot of organizations, synagogues, churches, small businesses. We've got to figure out how to adapt and still be here in 5 or 10 years. Yeah, and you got to listen to all ideas, and you got to throw some stuff up there and just hope it sticks. Anything I can do to help down the road, or have further conversations with you or anyone who you want to connect. I'm happy to give some time.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. This really was a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard. Be well.
And thank you all for joining us as well. There really is opportunity. There's always opportunity to grow a congregation and to make sure that you're operating it to its fullest potential. And it takes vision, and it takes the right people to implement these ideas. Sometimes it's yourself, the executive director here in this example with Jeff, taking on this grand idea of a secondary service to really draw in people who aren't feeling that anything else is drawing them in, and to help recreate the synagogue as a central part of their life. So there's a lot of lessons to learn from this conversation. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really know that I did, and look forward to more conversations as we move forward. But for now, go out, have a great rest of today, and we'll see you next time.